The stars stretched endlessly in every direction as the horizon's edge moved through the dark void of space. Captain Daniel Hayes stood on the bridge watching the view screen display another unremarkable sector of the outer terminus region. His crew had been mapping this area for 3 months now, and honestly, it was getting boring. Nothing but empty space, dead rocks, and gas giants that all looked the same. "Captain, I'm picking up something unusual," Lisa Martinez said from her station. She was the chief science officer, and her voice had that edge it got when she found something interesting. "There's an energy signature coming from the third moon of that gas giant. Its reading is biological, but the scale is massive." Daniel walked over to her console and looked at the readings. The thermal pattern showed something big, really big, and it was giving off heat like a small reactor. "How massive are we talking?" "At least 30 meters long, maybe bigger. And Captain, there are smaller readings around it. 5 of them, each about the size of a large vehicle." The bridge crew exchanged glances. In 3 years of deep space exploration, they had found bacteria, some simple plant-like organisms, and once a jellyfish creature floating in a gas cloud. But nothing like this. Nothing that could be this large and still be alive. "Set course for that moon," Daniel ordered. "Let's take a closer look." 2 hours later, an away team stood at the entrance of a massive cave system. Lieutenant Kevin Shaw led the group, which included Lisa Martinez, Security Chief Amy Walker, and 6 armed personnel. The cave mouth was easily 50 meters wide, and the air coming from inside was warm and smelled like sulfur mixed with something sweet. "Stay alert," Amy said, her weapon raised. "We don't know what we're dealing with here." They moved into the cave, their lights cutting through the darkness. The walls sparkled with crystal formations that reflected their lights in rainbow colors. As they went deeper, the temperature increased, and they began to hear something. A sound like breathing, slow and labored, echoing off the stone walls. Kevin raised his hand, signaling everyone to stop. Ahead, in a vast chamber, they saw it. The creature was beyond anything from Earth's mythology books. Its body stretched across the cave floor, covered in scales that shimmered with colors of deep purple, blue, and gold. The head was massive, with horns that curved backward, and even lying down, the being was taller than their shuttle. Wings, torn and damaged, lay folded against its sides. But what made everyone's blood run cold were the wounds. Across the creature's flank were deep gashes that glowed with a sickly green light. The flesh around the injuries looked wrong, like it was rotting from the inside out. The creature's breathing was shallow and painful. "What in the world?" Lisa whispered, her scientific mind struggling to process what she was seeing. "It looks like a dragon." "An actual dragon?" Before anyone could respond, pain exploded through their heads. It wasn't sound, but something that went directly into their minds. Images flooded their consciousness. Emotions not their own, a presence vast and ancient trying to communicate. 3 of the security team collapsed, their noses bleeding from the psychic pressure. The dragon's eye, as large as a dinner plate and colored like molten gold, opened and focused on them. "Weapons up," Amy shouted, thinking they were under attack. Her team raised their rifles, targeting the creature's head. The dragon flinched, trying to move away despite its obvious pain, and then they heard them. Voices high and frightened, speaking directly into their minds with a clarity that the mother's communication lacked. "Please don't harm us. Mommy is dying." From behind the massive dragon, 5 smaller creatures emerged. They were still dragons, but young, their scales brighter and their movements uncertain. Each was about the size of a horse, with wings too small for their bodies and eyes that were far too large and filled with terror. They huddled together, making small chirping sounds that echoed their telepathic pleas. The mother dragon, despite her weakness, shifted her body to cover her children, placing herself between them and the humans. The movement caused her wounds to leak more of that green substance, and she let out a sound of pure agony that made everyone's teeth hurt. Kevin lowered his weapon slowly. "Hold fire," he said quietly. "Everyone, lower your weapons now." Amy looked at him like he was crazy, but something in his voice made her comply. One by one, the team lowered their guns. The baby dragons peeked out from behind their mother, their telepathic voices a confused mixture of hope and fear. Kevin took a step forward, holding his hands out to show he was unarmed. "We're not going to hurt you," he said out loud, hoping the tone of his voice would convey what his words might not. "We want to help." The mother dragon's eye fixed on him, and he felt her presence in his mind again, gentler this time. He saw flashes of images, her hunting for food, trying to feed her growing children, an ambush by creatures that looked like a nightmare mixture of insect and reptile. weapons that pierced her scales and injected poison. Her desperate flight back to her nest, knowing she was dying but determined to protect her babies as long as she could. Kevin felt tears running down his face, the emotion of a mother's love transcending species barriers. "Lisa, are you getting this?" "Yes," she said, her own voice thick with emotion. "Captain Hayes needs to see these readings. That substance in her wounds, it's not just poison. It's breaking down her cellular structure. She's dying. And from these readings, she doesn't have long." Amy stepped beside Kevin, her professional soldier exterior cracking as she looked at the baby dragons clinging to each other. "What do we do?" Kevin touched his communicator. "Captain Hayes, this is Shaw. You need to see this. And sir, we have a situation that's way above our pay grade. We need medical down here immediately. And we need to decide if we're going to help or if we're going to watch a mother die in front of her children." On the bridge of the horizon's edge, Daniel Hayes looked at the video feed from Kevin's helmet camera and felt the weight of command settle on his shoulders like never before. In his years of space exploration, he had made many difficult decisions. But this one, looking at those baby dragons huddled around their dying mother, their telepathic voices still whispering pleas for mercy in the minds of his crew, this was different. This was a choice that would define not just his career, but possibly humanity's place in the galaxy. And the clock was already ticking. The conference room aboard the horizon's edge was filled with tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Captain Daniel Hayes sat at the head of the table, looking at the faces of his senior staff. On the main screen, the image of the wounded dragon and her 5 children played on loop, a constant reminder of what was at stake. Medical Officer Greg Palmer stood at the front, pointing to various charts and diagrams projected on the wall. His face was pale, and dark circles under his eyes showed he hadn't slept since examining the scans. "The toxin is unlike anything in our database. It's breaking down her cells one by one like a cascade failure. Based on the rate of decay, I estimate she has maybe 48 hours left. Probably less. Can we do anything?" Daniel asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Greg rubbed his tired eyes. "Maybe. The ship's medical fabricator could potentially synthesize an antidote, but we would need time. Days, possibly a week. We would need to analyze her biochemistry, understand how the toxin works, and then create something that can counteract it without killing her. And that's assuming we can even figure out the right compound." Commander Helen Price, the executive officer, shook her head firmly. "Captain, with all due respect, we need to leave. Now, we're not equipped for this kind of medical emergency. We're an exploration vessel, not a xenobiological research station. We have protocols for situations like this, and they all say we should document what we found and move on." "Those are children down there," Lisa Martinez said sharply, her voice cracking with emotion. "Sapient children who are begging us not to hurt them. Are we really going to abandon them?" "It's not about what we want to do," Helen argued. "It's about what we can do. We don't know if there are more of these creatures nearby. We don't know if our presence might be seen as hostile. We could be starting an interstellar incident. Or we could be saving lives," Lisa shot back. "Those baby dragons can't survive without their mother." The telepathic contact made that clear. "They're too young to hunt, too young to defend themselves. If we leave, we're sentencing them to death." Amy Walker, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "There's something else you all need to know. When we were in the cave, the mother showed us images. She was attacked by something. Creatures that hunt dragons specifically. If they attacked her, they might still be out there waiting." The room fell silent as everyone processed this information. Daniel felt the weight of command pressing down on him harder than ever. Every option seemed wrong. Leave and they would be abandoning sapient beings to die. Stay, and they could be putting his entire crew at risk. "Show me the telepathic data again," he said quietly. Lisa brought up the recordings from the away team's neural monitors. The images were fragmented, emotion more than words, but the message was clear. The mother dragon, fighting desperately against creatures that wanted to harvest her children. The poison slowly killing her. Her determination to protect her babies even as death approached. Daniel thought about his own daughter back on Earth, now grown but forever his little girl in his heart. He thought about what he would want someone to do if she was in danger, if he was dying and couldn't protect her. The choice, when he framed it that way, became clear. "We stay," he said firmly. "Greg, you have full access to all ship resources. Whatever you need to synthesize that antidote, you get it. Lisa, work with him on understanding the dragon's biology. Amy, I want a full security perimeter around that cave. If something attacked that dragon, it might come back. Helen looked like she wanted to argue, but she nodded. Understood, Captain. I'll coordinate with engineering to set up defensive systems. Down in the cave, Kevin Shaw had become the primary liaison with the dragons. He discovered quickly that direct telepathic contact was easier if he didn't fight it, if he let his mind relax and accept the images and emotions that came through. The mother dragon, through broken mental pictures, told him her name. The human translation was rough, but it came through as something like Starfire, a name that spoke of heat and light and movement through the void of space. The baby dragons were curious about him despite their fear. The smallest one, whose scales were bright red with orange highlights, kept creeping closer to sniff at him. Kevin decided to call her Ember in his mind, and somehow the little dragon understood and seemed to like the name. Through Starfire's memories, Kevin learned about the Draconese species. They were ancient, once numbering in thousands, now scattered and hiding. They had been hunted for centuries by the creatures that had poisoned Starfire. The hunters were called the Vesh, and they harvested dragon organs because they had regenerative properties worth fortunes on the black markets of a dozen worlds. Starfire had been hunting food for her growing children when the Vesh found her. They used poisoned weapons specifically designed to be slow-acting. The strategy was cruel but effective. They let the poisoned dragon return to her nest, then waited for death to take her so they could claim the real prize, the baby dragons whose organs were even more valuable. Kevin felt sick as he understood. The Vesh were still out there, watching, waiting. Starfire's death was certain in their eyes, and when she died, they would come for Ember and her siblings. "We won't let that happen," Kevin whispered, gently touching one of Ember's small horns. The baby dragon chirped and pressed against his hand, seeking comfort. Back in the medical bay, Greg Palmer worked frantically with his team. The dragon's biochemistry was incredibly complex, incorporating elements that shouldn't exist in biological systems. Her blood contained traces of exotic minerals found only in the moon's crust, suggesting the Draconis had evolved specifically in this type of environment. The toxin is designed to target their unique cellular structure, Greg explained to Lisa as they reviewed the data. It's not a natural poison. This was engineered specifically to kill dragons. Whoever made this knew exactly what they were doing. Can you counter it? I think so. The fabricator can create a compound that should bind to the toxin molecules and neutralize them. But Lisa, the dose required for a creature that size, we're talking about hundreds of liters, and we only get one shot at this. If we get the formula wrong, we could kill her faster than the poison. Lisa looked at the calculations and felt her stomach drop. The margin for error was razor thin. But what choice did they have? Up on the bridge, the sensor officer suddenly straightened. "Captain, I'm detecting multiple faster-than-light signatures. 6 contacts, unknown configuration, dropping out of warp at the edge of the system." Daniel felt his blood run cold. "Can you identify them?" "Negative. The design doesn't match anything in our database. They're heading this way. Captain, based on their trajectory, they're coming straight for this moon." Amy's voice came through the communicator from the cave. "Captain, Starfire is reacting to something. She's agitated, trying to move despite her injuries. The babies are terrified." "It's the Vesh," Kevin's voice added. "They're here for the children." Greg Palmer's hands shook as he loaded the antidote into the largest medical injector the ship had. The device was meant for treating wounded crew members in the field, but they had modified it to hold nearly 20 liters of the synthesized compound. It would take multiple injections to deliver the full dose Starfire needed, but it was their best option. "This has to work," he muttered to himself, checking the chemical composition one more time. The formula was as perfect as he could make, given the circumstances, but there were so many unknowns. Dragon biology was still mostly a mystery to them. In the cave, Amy Walker's security team had set up a defensive perimeter. Portable shield generators hummed at the cave entrance, and automated turrets tracked for any incoming threats. The team had placed motion sensors throughout the surrounding area, creating an early warning network, but Amy knew that if a real attack came, their small force might not be enough. "How long until the ships arrive?" she asked into her communicator. On the bridge, Daniel watched the tactical display with growing dread. The 6 unknown vessels were moving fast, too fast for peaceful intentions. 30 minutes until they reach orbit. Commander Price, bring all defensive systems online. Charge the main weapons. Captain, we've never fired on an unknown species before, Helen said carefully. Maybe they're coming to help. And maybe they're coming to finish what they started, Daniel replied. I'm not taking chances with children's lives. Hail them on all frequencies. Let's see if they respond. The communications officer worked her station for several minutes before shaking her head. No response, Captain. They're ignoring us completely. Then the ship's systems were flooded with something that made everyone gasp. It wasn't a radio transmission or a data packet. It was a psychic assault. Images of terror and pain forced directly into their minds. The crew saw visions of worlds burning, of creatures screaming as they were torn apart, of experiments that violated every law of decency and morality. The message was clear without words. Leave now, or this will be your fate. Daniel gritted his teeth against the mental invasion, forcing himself to focus. Cut that off. Block their transmission somehow. Lisa was already working on it, routing power through the ship's systems to create a kind of static that disrupted the telepathic signal. The horrific images faded, but everyone on the bridge looked shaken. Captain, they just sent us a message showing what they do to people who get in their way, Helen said quietly. Maybe we should consider evacuating the away team. And leave those babies to be harvested? Daniel's voice was hard as steel. Not happening. All hands to battle stations. If they want to fight, humanity just showed up to the party. He opened a channel to the approaching ships and sent a message of his own. No telepathy, just plain human defiance broadcast on every frequency. This is Captain Daniel Hayes of the Earth vessel Horizon's Edge. You are approaching a protected area. The beings on this moon are under our protection. Turn back now, or we will defend them with all necessary force. The response was immediate and violent. Energy weapons lashed out from the Vesh ships, sleek organic-looking vessels that glowed with sickly green light. The Horizon's Edge shuddered as its shields absorbed the impacts. Return fire, Daniel ordered. Show them we're not easy prey. The human ship's missiles streaked through space, their guidance systems locked onto the Vesh vessels. Two found their marks, exploding against alien hulls and tearing through bio-armor. But the other Vesh ships dodged with impossible agility, moving like living things rather than machines. On the ground, Amy's sensor started screaming warnings. We've got incoming. Multiple contacts dropping from orbit. They're landing around the cave. The Vesh ground forces hit like a nightmare made real. Pods slammed into the rocky surface and split open, releasing creatures that seemed designed by something that hated all other forms of life. They were the size of large dogs, with bodies covered in armored chitin, multiple legs that ended in razor-sharp claws, and mandibles that dripped with the same green toxin that was killing Starfire. Open fire, Amy shouted, and her team's weapons lit up the dim landscape. The Vesh creatures moved fast, scuttling over rocks and using every bit of cover. Some fell to the human weapons, their bodies rupturing in sprays of acidic blood that hissed against stone. But more kept coming. Inside the cave, Kevin Shaw stood between the baby dragons and the entrance. Ember and her siblings huddled behind him, their telepathic voices crying out in terror. Starfire tried to rise, maternal instinct overriding her weakened state, but she could barely lift her head. Greg, whatever you're going to do it now, Kevin yelled into his communicator. Greg Palmer rushed into the cave with two medical technicians, the heavy injector in his hands. They had to get close to Starfire, close enough to inject the antidote directly into the major blood vessels in her neck. But the dragon was thrashing, weakly, and her movements, even weakened, could easily kill a human. Starfire, please, Kevin said, placing his hand on her massive head and opening his mind to her. Let us help. We're trying to save you. The dragon's golden eye focused on him, and for a moment, there was understanding. She went still, trusting these strange small creatures who had chosen to fight for her children. Greg moved quickly, pressing the injector against the scales of her neck. The device punched through the armored hide and delivered the first dose of antidote directly into her bloodstream. Starfire flinched but didn't pull away. Outside, the battle was getting worse. The Vesh creatures were overwhelming Amy's defensive positions through sheer numbers. One of her team members went down, his armor torn by those terrible mandibles. Another was grabbed by 3 of the creatures and dragged away before anyone could help. "Fall back to the cave entrance," Amy ordered. "We can't hold this position." The team retreated in order, laying down covering fire as they moved. The portable shield generators bought them precious seconds, but the Vesh adapted quickly, finding weak points in the energy barriers. In space, the horizon's edge was taking heavy damage. The Vesh bioweapons were eating through the shields and several hull breaches had been reported. Daniel knew they couldn't win this fight, not against 6 ships with weapons technology they didn't understand. Commander Price prepared to evacuate the away team. "We may have to run." "Captain, we can't leave them down there," Helen said, though her face showed she knew they might not have a choice. Then something changed in the cave. Greg had finished. Administering the full dose of antidote, all 100 liters pumped into Starfire's system. For a long moment, nothing happened. The dragon lay still, her breathing shallow, the green glow from her wounds unchanged. The baby dragon's telepathic cries became desperate. They thought they were losing their mother. Ember pressed against Kevin, shaking with fear. Then Starfire's eye snapped open, bright and focused. The green glow in her wounds began to fade as the antidote fought against the toxin. Her breathing deepened, became stronger, and something remarkable happened. The 5 baby dragons, overwhelmed by emotion and fear, instinctively released a telepathic cry that was pure and unfiltered. It wasn't directed at anyone in particular. It was simply the universal cry of children in danger, a beacon of distress that carried across the void of space with surprising power. On the horizon's edge, every crew member with even slight telepathic sensitivity felt it. The cry of the baby dragons, desperate and afraid, calling out to anyone who might help. And across the star system, something impossible happened. Multiple massive energy signatures appeared on the sensors, biological readings so large that Lisa thought the equipment was malfunctioning. "Captain, you need to see this," she said, her voice filled with awe. "We're getting faster than light signatures, 12 of them, and they're huge. They're heading straight for us." The Vesh ships seemed to sense something too. Their attack patterns changed, becoming more aggressive, more desperate. They wanted to finish this before whatever was coming arrived, but they were too late. Space itself seemed to tear open as 12 adult Draconis dragons emerged from some kind of natural warp ability, their massive forms materializing in orbit around the moon. The arrival of the 12 adult dragons was like watching myths come to life. Each one was massive, easily twice the size of Starfire, their scales gleaming with colors that seemed to shift and change in the light of the distant sun. They moved through space as if they belonged there, wings that should have been useless in vacuum somehow propelling them forward with grace and power. On the horizon's edge, every sensor went crazy trying to track them all. The dragons radiated energy like small stars, their bodies generating heat and electromagnetic fields that interfered with the ship's instruments. Lisa stared at her readings in disbelief, trying to understand how living creatures could survive in the vacuum of space, let alone move and fight there. The lead dragon was the largest of them all, with scales of deep crimson highlighted with gold that seemed to glow from within. He was easily 60 meters from nose to tail, with horns that curved back like a crown and eyes that burned with intelligence and barely contained fury. When he opened his mouth, the void of space lit up with plasma breath that could have melted a battleship. Captain Daniel Hayes felt a presence touch his mind, but this time it was controlled, deliberate. The telepathic contact was clear, the thoughts translating into words he could understand. "Small brave ones who fights for the young of another species. I am called Ironscale, elder of the scattered Draconis. We heard the children's cry. We came." Daniel steadied himself, trying to project thoughts back. He had no idea if it would work. "I'm Captain Daniel Hayes. The Vesh are attacking. We're trying to protect Starfire and her children. You chose to stand against the Vesh alone. For children not your own." Ironscale's mental voice carried something. That might have been respect or surprise. "Your species is either very brave or very foolish." "Maybe both," Daniel admitted. "But we don't abandon children in need. That's not who we are." What came back from Ironscale felt like the mental equivalent of a fierce smile. "Then we shall show the Vesh what happens when they threaten the young and find allies instead of victims. Watch, small brave one. Watch and learn what dragons can do when we fight together. The 12 adult dragons turned their attention to the Vesh fleet, and what followed was a display of power that would be recorded in both human and dragon history for generations to come. The Vesh ships tried to maneuver, tried to bring their bioweapons to bear, but they were outmatched. Ironscale led the charge, his massive form accelerating to impossible speeds. His plasma breath cut through the first Vesh ship like it was made of paper, the organic hull melting and rupturing as atmosphere and bodies were sucked into space. The other dragons followed, working in coordination that spoke of ancient battle tactics refined over centuries. They moved in pairs, one dragon drawing fire while another attacked from an unexpected angle. Their claws, which seemed too primitive to be effective weapons in space combat, somehow tore through the Vesh bioarmor with terrifying ease. The Vesh fleet, which had been overwhelming the human ship moments before, suddenly found itself on the defensive. They tried to focus fire on individual dragons, but the scaled hide seemed almost immune to their weapons. Energy blasts that had eaten through the horizon's edge shields merely left scorch marks on dragon scales. One Vesh ship tried to ram Ironscale, its organic hull probably filled with explosive material, meant to kill the dragon at close range. The elder dragon simply caught the ship in his claws and crushed it, the way a human might crush an empty can. The explosion that followed washed over his scales harmlessly. On the ground, Amy Walker and her team were still fighting desperately against the Vesh ground forces. They had retreated to the cave entrance, and the narrow opening helped them defend against the swarm of creatures. But ammunition was running low and people were getting tired. Then shadows fell across the battlefield. Two of the adult dragons, their scales colored in shades of silver and blue, descended from the sky and landed with impacts that shook the ground. They were each the size of a large building, and when they roared, the sound was felt more than heard, a pressure wave that made the Vesh creatures hesitate. The dragons didn't use plasma breath. They didn't need to. One of them simply swept its tail across the rocky terrain, and the Vesh creatures in its path were reduced to paste. The other dragon leaped forward with surprising speed for something so large, its claws picking up Vesh warriors and crushing them or throwing them against rocks with bone-breaking force. The Vesh ground forces broke. Whatever instincts drove them, they recognized a predator far above them in the food chain. Those that could scattered, trying to reach their landing pods. They didn't make it. The two dragons hunted them down with ruthless efficiency. Amy lowered her weapon, breathing hard, hardly able to believe what she was seeing. Well, that's one way to turn a battle around. Inside the cave, Starfire was sitting up now, the antidote having worked faster than anyone expected. The green glow was almost completely gone from her wounds, and while she was still weak, the immediate danger had passed. Her 5 children swarmed around her, chirping and crying with joy, their telepathic voices singing with relief. Greg Palmer watched with satisfaction, though he was exhausted. The antidote is working better than I hoped. Her own healing abilities are taking over now. She's going to make it. Kevin Shaw felt tears of relief running down his face. Ember climbed up his leg and onto his shoulder, her small claws careful not to hurt him. The baby dragon nuzzled against his neck, her telepathic voice filled with gratitude and affection. In space, the battle was already over. Of the 6 Vesh ships, 4 were destroyed, reduced to drifting debris. The remaining 2 had managed to jump to faster-than-light speed, fleeing the system in panic. The dragons let them go, apparently satisfied with sending a message rather than pursuing a total massacre. Ironscale contacted the horizon's edge again. Captain Hayes, I would speak with you, face to face, if possible. There is much we must discuss. I'll come to you, Daniel said, not sure how else to respond. Give me a few minutes to get to a shuttle. That will not be necessary. I shall come to you. Your ship has an open hangar bay that will accommodate me. 20 minutes later, Daniel stood in the main hangar with half his senior staff, watching as Ironscale carefully maneuvered his massive body through the opening. The dragon's scales scraped against the bulkheads and his presence filled the entire space. The hangar had never seemed small before, but with an adult dragon inside, it felt positively tiny. Ironscale settled onto the deck, folding his wings carefully to avoid damaging equipment. His eyes, each as large as a human head, focused on the assembled crew. When he spoke, his telepathic voice was clear in all their minds, but somehow also came from his throat as a rumbling bass that vibrated through the ship's structure. You saved Starfire and her children when you had no reason to do so. You fought the Vesh knowing you were outmatched. You risked everything for beings you had never met before today. Ironscale's head lowered until he was eye level with Daniel, and the captain could see his own reflection in that golden gaze. Tell me, Captain Hayes, why did you do this? Daniel thought about how to answer, aware that what he said next might shape the future of his species' relationship with these incredible beings. Finally, he simply told the truth, because it was the right thing to do. Those children were terrified and their mother was dying. We had the ability to help, so we did. It's what humans do when we're at our best. We look out for each other, even when each other includes beings we've never seen before. Ironscale was quiet for a long moment, and Daniel wondered if he had said something wrong. Then the dragon's telepathic voice came again, and this time it carried deep emotion. For 300 of your years, the Draconis have been hunted by the Vesh. We were once a great people, living on dozens of worlds, sharing knowledge with other species. The Vesh came like a plague, hunting us for our bodies, killing us for profit. We scattered, went into hiding, lived in isolated family groups. We were too afraid to call out to each other, too afraid that gathering together would only bring the Vesh in greater numbers. The dragon's eyes seemed to look at something far away, memories of better times. We forgot what it meant to have allies. We forgot that other species might stand with us rather than against us. We were dying slowly, losing hope, waiting for extinction. Ironscale's focus returned to Daniel. But your species, who knew nothing of our history, who had no obligation to us, you stood and fought. You risked your ship, your crew, your lives for children who were not yours. You reminded us that there can be more in this universe than predators and prey. The elder dragon straightened to his full height. I ask you, Captain Daniel Hayes, speaking for your species, would humanity stand with the Draconis? Not as masters and servants, but as true allies against darkness? Daniel didn't hesitate. Yes, we will stand with you. The weeks following the battle passed in a blur of activity and wonder. Starfire recovered fully, the antidote having purged the Vesh toxin from her system. Her wounds healed at a rate that amazed Greg Palmer and his medical team, the dragon's natural regenerative abilities far exceeding anything found in human biology. Within 10 days she was moving normally, and within 3 weeks, the only signs of her ordeal were scars hidden beneath her scales. The baby dragons thrived under the care of both their mother and their new human friends. Ember had become particularly attached to Kevin Shaw, following him everywhere when he visited the cave. The little dragon had learned to moderate her telepathic communication, no longer overwhelming humans with unfiltered emotion. She sent him mental images of things she found interesting, like the way light reflected off crystals, or the taste of the local wildlife. Starfire caught for her children. Kevin spent hours teaching the baby dragons about humans, while learning about Draconis culture in return. It was a strange exchange, conducted mostly through mental images and feelings rather than words. He learned that dragons measured age differently, living for thousands of years. Ember and her siblings were barely 3 years old in human terms, but they would remain children for nearly 50 years before reaching maturity. In the converted cargo bay of the Horizon's Edge, Ironscale met regularly with Captain Daniel Hayes and his senior staff. The massive dragon had proven to be remarkably patient about explaining his species' history and culture. Through telepathic sharing of memories, the humans learned the full tragic story of the Draconis. The dragons had once numbered over 100,000, living on 17 different worlds. They were philosophers and explorers, using their natural ability to survive in space to travel between stars without needing ships. They had encountered dozens of other species and formed peaceful relationships with most of them. The Draconis shared their knowledge freely and asked for little in return except friendship and conversation. Then the Vesh arrived, a species driven entirely by profit and cruelty. They discovered that dragon organs could be harvested and sold for enormous sums to wealthy beings across the galaxy. Dragon heart tissue could regenerate damaged organs in other species. Dragon brain matter could enhance telepathic abilities. Dragon bone marrow could extend lifespans. The Vesh didn't ask or trade. They simply hunted. The war that followed lasted for over a century and ended with the Draconis scattered and broken. The 17 worlds were abandoned, left empty as the surviving dragons fled into the depths of space. They went into hiding individually or in small family groups, too afraid to gather together lest they attract the Vesh in numbers they could not fight. We forgot who we were, Ironscale explained to the assembled human crew. We became survivors rather than people. We stopped building, stopped creating, stopped hoping for anything beyond the next day. When I heard the children's telepathic cry, I almost didn't respond. I was afraid. Afraid of the Vesh, afraid of losing more of our kind. What changed your mind? Lisa Martinez asked gently. The other part of that cry. The part that came from Starfire as the medicine began to work. She shared what you had done. How you had chosen to help despite having nothing to gain. How you fought the Vesh, knowing you were outmatched. How you stood between her children and death. The dragon's golden eyes swept across the humans. I realized that if your kind could be that brave for strangers, then I had no right to hide in fear. I called out to other dragons, breaking centuries of silence. And they came. Over the next weeks, more dragons arrived. Some came alone, others in small family groups. Each had been living in hiding, scattered across different star systems. The telepathic network that had been silent for so long suddenly came alive with communication. Dragons who had thought they were the last of their kind discovered cousins, siblings, old friends still alive. The cave system on the moon became a gathering place. 23 adult dragons and 15 juveniles assembled there, the largest gathering of dracones in 300 years. They shared stories, mourned the lost, and slowly began to remember what it meant to be a people rather than just refugees. And through it all, the humans of the horizon's edge were there, helping and learning. Amy Walker worked with dragon warriors to develop combined combat tactics. Dragons could provide overwhelming power and mobility, while humans offered precision weapons and strategic planning. Together, they began to devise ways to hunt the Vesh rather than simply defending against them. Greg Palmer collaborated with dragons who had knowledge of biological sciences. He learned that dragons could manipulate their own biochemistry to a limited extent, adapting to different environments. In return, he taught them about human medical techniques. The exchange of knowledge went both ways, each species having strengths the other lacked. Lisa Martinez was like a child in a candy store, learning about dragon technology and culture. She discovered that dragons could travel faster than light by using a kind of biological warp drive, manipulating space-time through organs in their bodies that generated exotic matter. It was a completely different approach to space travel than human technology, and the implications were staggering. But the most important work was being done by Kevin Shaw and Commander Helen Price. They were drafting a treaty, a formal agreement between humanity and the Draconis. It wasn't easy. The two species were so different, had such different needs and ways of thinking, but they worked through it, finding common ground. The Treaty of Starfire's Moon, as it came to be called, established the first human-dragon alliance. It laid out terms of mutual defense, cultural exchange, and shared resources. Humanity offered technology, organizational skills, and the ability to coordinate with other species that might join the alliance. The Draconis offered their power, their knowledge of the galaxy, and their telepathic network that could coordinate across vast distances instantly. 1 month after the battle, Daniel stood before Ironscale and Starfire in the main cave, surrounded by dragons and humans alike. The baby dragons played nearby, their chirps and telepathic laughter filling the air. Ember sat on Kevin's shoulder, her growing size making it clear she wouldn't fit there much longer. This treaty represents more than just an agreement between our species, Daniel said, holding up the data pad that contained the formal document. It represents a choice to stand together against cruelty, a choice to protect the innocent, a choice to be more than just survivors in a hostile universe. Ironscale lowered his massive head in agreement. For too long, fear ruled us. Fear of the Vesh, fear of extinction, fear of hoping for better days. Your species, in one act of compassion, broke that fear. You reminded us that there are still beings in this galaxy worth fighting for, worth standing beside. Starfire spoke for the first time in the human minds, her telepathic voice clearer now that she had learned to moderate her mental power. You saved my children. You fought for them when you could have run. That debt can never be repaid, but it can be honored. The Draconis will stand with humanity in war and peace until the stars grow cold. The formal signing was simple. Daniel pressed his thumbprint to the datapad, making humanity's commitment official. Ironscale and Starfire touched the device with their claws, their telepathic agreement binding their species to the treaty. Other dragons present added their own marks, creating a document that would change galactic history. 2 days later, the Horizon's Edge prepared to depart the moon. But the ship would not travel alone. Starfire and her 5 children would accompany them, along with Ironscale and 4 other adult dragons. They were bound for human space, where the Alliance would be presented to Earth's government and the wider human community. As the ship lifted off, Daniel stood on the bridge and looked at the view screen. Behind them, dragons circled the moon in a display of joy and freedom. For the first time in centuries, they were not hiding. They were not afraid. They were a people again, with allies who had proven they would stand beside them. "Captain, we're receiving transmissions from across the sector," the communications officer reported. "Dragons who are still scattered are asking for coordinates. They want to gather, want to be part of this new beginning." "Send them the coordinates of Earth," Daniel said. "Let them know they have a place to gather safely, protected by both their own kind and by humanity." Lisa Martinez looked at the sensor readings, tracking the dragons that followed them. "Do you think we're ready for this, Captain? We've just made humanity a target for the Vesh. They won't forgive us for what we did." "Probably not," Daniel admitted. "But Lisa, think about what we've gained. An alliance with a species that can travel through space naturally, that has knowledge of dozens of worlds, that brings power and wisdom we can't even imagine. And more than that, we've done the right thing. We've shown that humanity stands for something. The journey back to Earth would take 3 months at faster than light speeds. During that time, the crew and their dragon companions would work together, learning about each other, planning for the future. The baby dragons would grow, learning to control their abilities and understanding the strange bipedal creatures who had saved their mother. Kevin Shaw spent his off hours in the cargo bay with Ember, teaching her about human culture while